rather Christmassy, but I can't help but feel like something's missing. Well, that helped, but that wasn't it. No, no, well, no. That's a no. That's still no. I know what's missing. Stockings! I celebrate Christmas and I have a stocking, but it is at my parents' house. I have had one, the same one, ever since I was a kid, and so it is still at my parents' house because that is where I go every year for Christmas. You know, since we don't really celebrate Christmas here, I only do so much decorating. However, I love stockings. I think they're so cute, and I have a mantle to hang them on, so I want to make stockings. Now, I don't want to make myself a stocking, but I do have 3 four-legged children who I think it would be such a joy to make them custom stockings. This is number 1. This is Peanut. She's very sweet, very grumpy, and very orange. If you are a cat owner, you know what that means. This is number 2. This is Bortus. He's a scaredy cat, but he is a snuggle bug. I just woke him up from a nap, so he's not the happiest right now. And my last one is my son. He's a little bit too big to pick up. He's only 50 pounds. I can put him in the car. He doesn't really like being picked up. Give me your little eggs. Here you are. Those are my children. I will not be accepting any comments as to the contrary. And for them, I want to make stockings. So I'm going to be making these out of felt. I have no real plan, just an idea and, you know, four-legged creatures who are now very annoyed with me. So, with all that said, let's make some stockings.
So this is the material I have for my stocking, and I have a couple comments. One, again, why can't, like, these be the same color white? They are from 2 different stores. You can tell this one's a little bit more of a cream colored. This is a little bit more of a true white. And then what I also have is some black felt, some tan felt, and some very orange felt. Because I'm doing these stockings in the colors of the critters. So Domino's is going to be mostly white with some black accents. Peanuts is going to be one of those colors with some white accents. And Bortus is going to be all black with some white accents. And I'm not planning on making these huge. I just kind of want, like, small stockings. Like, you know, kind of like maybe like, you have no frame of reference for how big that is. But this shape, and you'll see. So I have 2 of each of these pieces. I have 4 of the small. I have 3 of the small. Do I really? Okay. I have 3 of the small white felt. I could have sworn I had 4. And I have 2 of the big white felt. Domino's is going to be bigger because he is a bigger dog. The cats, I'm having an interesting thought with Peanut. Because I got this at first. And I was like, oh, you know, this isn't orange enough. But this is, like, really orange. So I think I'm probably going to use a combo. And hopefully that'll, like, calm. Okay, I don't know. We're going to come back to that. I'm going to start with Domino's because I have a vision in mind. So I will show you the design for that. And then we are going to get to freehanding stocking patterns. I almost forgot the last material I have is craft fur. This is what I'm going to use as the fluff at the top of the stocking. However, I couldn't find it in white. I have literally spent a week and gone to several different stores. I cannot find this in white. I cannot find any variation of it in white. I'm beyond frustrated, so Bortus and Peanut are just going to get white felt at the top of their stocking. Domino's is going to be the only one that actually gets fluff at the top of his stocking, because then this is the only one. There was only one of these in the store, no other color, nothing else. Michael's had nothing. So, and there's 2 Michaels in my area. One's a good Michaels, one's a bad Michaels. Even the good Michaels failed me. So that was a little disappointing. But, so I'm just going to use felt because I can always tack fur like this onto the stocking after it's finished. Just like hand tack it on. So it's not the biggest deal in the world. It's just frustrating. But anyways, this is the other material that I forgot to mention.
So the first step was to make a sock shape. And I did not measure this with anything. I just kind of eyeballed what shape a sock looks like and went for it from there. To transfer my pattern onto felt, I used a Sharpie. This isn't a bad way of doing it. However, you should be careful to note whether or not these seams are going to be exposed. Because I was sewing this normally, so like right sides together and then going to flip it inside out, I didn't have to worry about the Sharpie bleeding through. But if I was finishing this with a blanket stitch on the edge, where essentially that raw edge would still be exposed, you would see this Sharpie color. So that's something to note and just, you know, be careful with. I am adding seam allowance because, again, I am sewing these together like a normal sewing project, and I cut out both pieces at the same time. I wish I could say I scaled or graded the smaller sock pattern in any way, shape, or form. I did not. I just kind of, again, eyeballed what a smaller sock shape would look like and cut that out for the cat stockings. They ended up, honestly, about exactly what I wanted, but yeah, no, there was no measuring done here. I did cut the black stocking out of the black felt first because I wanted to make sure no matter what design I put on top of Domino's stocking that I still had enough to do Bortus's stocking. So once I had the black stocking part cut out, I decided to sketch it on my stocking pattern because I wanted to kind of make sure that I got the pieces kind of the right size, that everything felt like it visually worked together. And I decided I was going to do the domino in black, and I was also going to give this stocking a heel cap section. You know how some socks have the toe and the heel as a different color? I decided to only do the heel in black to resemble the spot that Domino has on his back. I could have done this one of two ways. I could have actually just directly cut out the little curved part at the bottom from my stocking pattern. However, I think I'm going to keep the stocking pattern on the off chance that I ever need to make a stocking of this exact size again, especially because I was so happy with the result. So I decided to trace that arc onto a different piece of paper and then use that as my pattern so that I left my original stocking intact. This process and, methodology is also what I did for later. I put toe caps on the cat stockings, and I decided to do it the exact same way. Drew it on my original pattern and cut it out of separate paper so that my original pattern stayed intact. The heel cap for the stocking is going to be mirrored on both sides, so I cut it out from both pieces of felt at the exact same time, just like I did the base stocking, and I decided to top stitch on all of my felt pieces to make my life easier. I did that before sewing them all together, so I just kind of clipped them in place, and I did use my clips over pins because felt is kind of thick, and the clips stop the fabric from bunching up on itself, and just top stitched it down. So you do have to make sure that you have the same top thread color as your felt, otherwise your stitches will be very visible. The only exception I will say that I made for this was for the domino. I did actually top stitch in white the center kind of break line on the domino. It's not super visible, but I decided to do that over, trying to hand stitch a thin line of white felt in place. So the details for the domino are going to be a paw print on top and then 3 dots on the bottom. This is actually inspired by a water dish that I made for Domino, I guess pretty early on when I got him. I didn't make the base, but I did paint it. But in the original, it only had 1 dot. And here I decided to do 3. Domino is a rescue. He's adopted. And we guessed that he was about 3 years old when we got him. So that's why I decided to put 3 dots on the bottom of this domino. Otherwise, I just cut all these really, really tiny pieces of felt out and hand stitched them on one by one. I picked one piece of the design that I thought was going to be the anchor point, so that was the kind of center paw pad of the domino, and stitched that on first because I figured it would be better if that ended up slightly askew. I could place all of the other details around it accordingly versus stitching on one of the toes and then having to work off of that. There is probably some sort of specific name for the stitch that I use to sew these on, but I'm just essentially going to call it a whip stitch. I just went through the bottom of the felt and then up into the design and down. So essentially the thread was also slightly encasing the raw edge as I went around. This was the fastest, generally easiest, and I think it looks pretty good overall in the end as well. Your tension, you do want to watch it out if you are hand stitching felt. Felt does compress. So if you want it to be attached but not reduce the look of your edges, then you want to make sure you have a loose tension as you're stitching. I ended up pulling it kind of tight because I really did like almost that 3D effect where it made the edges much flatter and smaller, and then it left kind of a bubble or puff in the center. I kind of liked that look. Once I finished hand stitching on all the domino details, I decided to sew up the stocking, and here is where I went wrong on Domino's. If you'll notice, it's missing the black fuzz at the top. I absolutely should have sewn that on basically to the respective sides before sewing it up. I thought that I would be able to sew it on as basically a ring or a loop at the end. I was wrong. This ended up being slightly too tight, and I'll explain more in a second.
So the stocking's done, and I didn't record, I don't think, much of putting this stupid thing on, because I did not do this smartly. So here is what you should do if you ever make one of these on your own, if you're using this goddamn abhorrent substance. Yeah, I'm looking forward to making the other two with not this. Basically what I should have done is cut it in half on either side and sew it across the top before stitching it around. I don't know why I didn't think of that. Technically, this part of the sewing machine comes off, so you can get round things around it. This is too small. Sorry for how if that was loud. This is too small. So instead, I had to seam rip open part of this to be able to flat stitch this along this part, and then aggressively put all this together. So it's messy on the inside, but I attached ribbon. I sewed this in when I sewed that on, so there's now ribbon attached to it. So it's messy. It's not necessarily supposed to be clean. I didn't buy it. I made it. It's for a dog. He is my son. However, he is not capable of understanding what a stocking is, so I think he's going to be just fine with it. But anyways, oh my god, I was not smart about this. Anyways, we're going to take the lessons I learned from this one and apply it to the rest of them. I have the stuff for bordesses cut out right now. I think I'm going to do them all facing this way. I think I have to cut out the stuff. I think I want to do a paw print on all of them because I think that'd be super cute. But yeah, dominoes is done, and I hate felt. I hate craft fur. This is an evil substance, and I should have been smart about it. But this is what I get for again doing things on my own haphazardly with no pattern. So, in case my explanation of what I should have done for the domino stocking was not clear, I'm going to explain it with this one, which is bordesses. So I have sewn my toe cap on the same way that I did the heel for domino. The only difference I made to this one is I hand stitched the paw print onto the white circle that I want to use before I've stitched it on. Not really any reason for a difference other than this way the threads will be captured in the melding between the two felts, and there's no risk of anything getting undone from the other side. But this is what I should have done with the felt high domino. Domino is next to the tripod, so it might get knocked. But basically folded it down right sides together and sewn it across the top so I can fold it up and get this there. So this emblem is going to get sewn on, so I have to sew this on now. Just gonna stitch it around in white there, and then I will put the two halves of the stocking together and stitch it up with my ribbon, and then I will have bordesses stocking.
For details like this on the center of the stocking, I just used a single pin and tried to get it as flat as possible. Felt does kind of stick to itself, but at the same time, I wanted to make sure these stayed in place. So this was freehand top stitching, basically. So here is me flipping the stocking inside out. One thing I will note that in order to attach the ribbon to both of the cat stockings, I did not actually sew it on at the same time that I did the cuff at the top. I sewed the cuff on and then went again to sew the ribbon on using the seam allowance from the cuff. So it's essentially sewn on in the same place, but by a slightly different method. This just reduced the number of things I had to worry about or be concerned at once. But look, here is Bordes's finished stocking. So I decided clearly at this point everything was far too simple and easy and that I needed more of a challenge. So I decided for Peanut's stocking that I was going to do orange stripes. She is an orange tabby cat after all, and one of those distinctive features is that they have kind of those different orange stripes in their fur. Is this a very aggressive orange for that? Yes. However, I really like it. I think it's actually really cute. And I did the exact same process, stitching down all of these individual orange stripes, one by one, by hand. I think it took around an hour. Overall, I had these stockings finished in a single afternoon. But yeah, Peanuts definitely took the longest because of all of this hand stitching. The cat ones were also a little bit harder to turn inside out because they were so small, but you kind of helped use the Sharpie to like poke out the end of the stocking so that it could actually sit properly, because I literally could not get my hand down inside of it. But I think it turned out so absolutely adorable, and here is Peanut's stocking. So here are all three stockings in all of their glory. I think they're so absolutely adorable. I do love the fuzz on top of Domino's, but I actually really don't mind the plain felt on the other two. I think they're just as endearing and just as cute. A few things, I wasn't as good with my seam allowance on some of the toe cap details, and so I intended to either sew on top of or capture that same seam allowance, but I didn't do the best job of that, and so if you look at it, you kind of see the seam of where that toe cap was stitched on. It's a minor detail, no one will ever notice it but me. Do the critters even care that they have stockings? Probably not. But I think they're really, really cute. This made me so happy and brought so much joy to myself personally. And, this is for me. I had fun. It was a relatively cheap project. Felt is pretty cheap, depends on what quality felt you get. But I hope, if nothing else, maybe this inspired you to tackle a project or two this holiday season. Making something is always so satisfying and worth the endeavor. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a happy holidays, and I will see you in the next one.